Welcome everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to Clarity for Sure. This is our new session of DC MCQs, that is Daily Current Affairs MCQs. So here we will be covering the top 10 MCQs of the day, but before we move forward, please do subscribe our YouTube channel, follow us on Telegram as well for daily updates. So let's start our today's session with very first question that is related to payment aggregator. Fine. So the question is, process backed fintech firm PayU Payments Private Limited has received final authorization from the Reserve Bank of India to function as an online payment aggregator, marking a major regulatory milestone after over a year since securing in principle approval. Which of the statement is incorrect regarding payment aggregator? So this is the question. We have to find the incorrect option here. So the first option is, the first statement over here is, a payment aggregator is a third party service provider that enables merchants to accept digital payments through multiple methods. Fine. So our next statement is, a payment aggregator partners with several processing entities including direct banks, acquiring banks, alt credit products and issuers of wallets and brings them into a single platform. The third statement is, a payment aggregator license in India is issued by RBI, that is Reserve Bank of India, under the RBI Act of 1934. The last statement is, Razorpay, MobiKwik, AirPay are the examples of payment aggregators, and option E, that is all are correct. Fine. So in this question, first you have to understand what is payment aggregator. That is a very important concept. Payment aggregator is a third party service provider which act as a bridge between all the entities which are there in the payment system, like the payers bank and the receiver banks as well as NPCL. So combining all these entities through payment aggregator, a single payment is done. Fine. So this is the basic concept of payment aggregator. So based on this particular knowledge information, let's figure out which of the statement here is incorrect. So our first statement is, a payment aggregator is a third party service provider. Fine. Third party service provider that enables merchants to accept digital payments through multiple methods. So as I told, this is a third party service provider which facilitates the payment and accept digital payments through multiple methods. Multiple method includes UPI, credit cards, debit cards. Fine. So this statement is correct. The second statement, a payment aggregator partners with several processing entities including direct banks, acquiring banks, alt credit products and issuer of the wallets, brings them to a single platform. This is also the correct statement. This brings all the stakeholders, all the entities into a single platform. Fine. So this statement is also correct. Option C, a payment aggregator license in India is issued by RBI, that is Reserve Bank of India, under the RBI Act of 1934. So you guys tell me this statement is correct or not. It is issued by RBI, but under which act? Is it under RBI Act of 1934 or what? So see, payment aggregator license is issued by RBI but not under the RBI Act of 1934. It is issued under the PSSA, that is Payment and Settlement System Act of 2007. Fine. So based on this information, option C is incorrect. So here is our answer, that is option C, but we'll still go through the option D once. That is Razorpay, MobiKwik, AirPay are the examples of payment aggregators. Yes, these are the examples of online payment aggregators. Fine. So here our correct answer will be option C. Option C here is the correct answer. So let's see some of the important points regarding a payment aggregator. So first of all, this is a whole scenario. This whole could be known as payment system. Fine. So there are multiple stakeholders, as you can see, which I have talked about. I was talking about ki there is multiple stakeholders which are directly or indirectly connected with payment aggregators. So let's understand this diagram first. So starting with payer, that is customer, first it makes payment through UPI, and then the payment goes to payment aggregator, and payment gateway here will provide the network to payment aggregator. Then authorization request is sent to PS partner banks, that is payment aggregators partner banks, and then the partner banks send the authorization request to whom? To NPCL, that is National Payments Corporation of India. Then NPCL sends authorization request to the peers bank, fine, and finally authorization response comes from the payer banks to NPCL, and then authorization response goes to partners bank from NPCL, and finally PA, that is payment aggregator, receives money and it receives debit notification, fine, and then finally it transfer the money to merchant's bank, and finally merchant or seller receives the notification. So this is acting as a bridge between all the entities, all the stakeholders, and through this a payment is done, fine. So this is a whole process. So the second thing which is there is the payment aggregator license. As I told, it is issued by RBI but under the Payment and Settlement System Act of 2007, fine, not under RBI Act of 1934. Specifically, the RBI's guidelines for regulating payments aggregator are issued under section 10 clause 2, read with section 18 of the PSSA. Types of payment aggregators in India, two types of payment aggregators are there. One is bank payment aggregators, the bank who are acting as a payment aggregator or who are providing the service of payment aggregator will be known as bank payment aggregators. And the second one is third party payment aggregators. These includes PhonePe, Google Pay. These are the third party payment aggregators who provide the payment aggregator facility but are third parties, fine. So that's why they are called third party payment aggregators. So that's it for this particular topic. Let's move on to our next question, that is question number 2, and which is related to Matsya 6000. So Matsya 6000 recently seen in news is associated with which of the following? You guys tell me this particular thing, that is Matsya 6000 is associated with which of the following? The first one is it is a surface to air missile. It is a surface to air missile. The second one is a Russian designed man battle. The third one is twin engine fighter aircraft, or fourth generation deep ocean human scientific submersible, or none of the above. You guys tell me what is the correct answer of this question. What is Matsya 6000 is associated with? This is actually associated with what? Fourth generation deep ocean scientific submersibles. This is going to be used in India's first deep sea exploration program mission, fine. And this is a deep sea first human made deep sea scientific submersible, that is fourth generation, fine. So let's see some of the important highlights of this mission, that is India's first deep sea exploration mission. So this is Matsya 6000. This is the submersibles I was talking about, fine. So it will be going to use in India's first manned deep ocean mission. And what is this mission about? The mission is about sending 3 human beings to 6 kilometers of depth in a self-propelled submersible, that is Matsya 6000, fine. And the primary objective of this mission is to explore deep sea resources and biodiversity assessment, endurance of 12 hours under normal operations and 96 hours in case of emergency. So that's it for this particular mission. Let's move back to our question. So question number 3 is related to FPI, related to the FPI, right? That is foreign portfolio investors. So the Security and Exchange Board of India has proposed a new framework to ease regulatory requirement for foreign portfolio investors investing exclusively in Indian government bonds. Consider the following statement as far as the new framework is concerned. So let's see some of the statement regarding new framework. Fine. So the first statement is FPIs investing only through the voluntary retention route, VRR, fully accessible route will be classified as Indian government bond FPI. This is a new category which has been introduced through the new framework of SEBI. Fine. The second one is under a recent proposal, NRIs and OCIs can control IGB FPIs, that is Indian government bond focused foreign portfolio investors without any contribution limits, while resident Indians RIs may still face some restriction. What are NRIs here? NRIs, non-resident Indians, Indian citizens who are residing outside India. OCI, person of Indian origin. Fine. Foreign person of Indian origin. Then there is resident Indian, that is which are residing in India. Fine. So under a recent proposal, NRIs and OCIs can control IGB FPIs without any contribution limit, while resident Indians may still face some restriction. The third one is under the current norms, a single NRI, OCI or RI can contribute up to 25%. It is talking about the current norms of the FPI's total investment, and the combined contribution of all NRIs, OCI and RIs cannot exceed 50% of the FPI's corpus. Fine. So this is a question. You guys tell me which of these statements are correct. So let's find out one by one. First of all, you have to understand what is FPI. As I have told you, FPI is foreign portfolio investors. It is an investment done in Indian financial market in two types. First is share, that is in stock market. Fine. And the second one is bond. If the investment is done in the share, like companies, the investors are purchasing the share of the company, so it will be known as equity market, investment in equity market. Fine. And the investment when done in terms of bond, it will be known as debt market, investment in debt market. Fine. And FPI is any investment done in the Indian market in order to gain return from it. Right. The objective of this investment is to gain return from the investment. Fine. Or either through purchasing bonds or purchasing equities. It do not have any control over the company or company's assets. Fine. This is the main difference between FDI and FPI. FDI may the primary aim is to gain the access, the physical access of the digital of the physical access of the assets. In FDI, the investors have control over the company and the asset of the company, but in FPI there is no control over the companies or companies assets. Fine. And that is it for FPI, nothing else to discuss. Coming back to our topic, our next topic here is voluntary retention route. What is VRR? It is a investment method introduced by RBI. Fine. So if any FPI investing only through voluntary retention route, fine, BRR will get some sort of ease in the restriction rules of RBI. मतलब BRR के कोई भी FPIs अगर वॉलेंटियरी रिटेंशन रूट के थ्रू इन्वेस्ट करता है, फाइन, तो उन्हें कुछ छूट दी जाएगी जो नॉर्मल FPIs के लिए रूल्स RBI की बनाई गई है उनमें, फाइन, नॉर्मल RBI के द्वारा जो FPIs के द्वारा रूल्स जो बनाई गई उनमें कुछ छूट दी जाएंगी अगर वो वॉलेंटियरी रिटेंशन रूट के थ्रू इन्वेस्ट करते हैं. And these are for the long term investment, fine, these are usually 3 years. मतलब अगर 3 साल के लिए कुछ अमाउंट ऑफ पैसा इन्वेस्टर्स इंडियन मार्केट में छोड़ते हैं तो सम रेस्ट्रिक्शन विल बी ईज्ड बाय द गवर्नमेंट, कुछ रेस्ट्रिक्शन हटा ली जाएंगी उनके लिए जो BRR के थ्रू इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हैं इंडियन मार्केट में. बदले में उनको 3 साल के लिए अपना कुछ अमाउंट यहाँ पे छोड़ना पड़ेगा. जो इन्वेस्ट उन्होंने किया उनमें से कुछ अमाउंट 3 साल तक कम से कम वहाँ पे रखना पड़ेगा इंडियन मार्केट में, फाइन. So this is the concept of voluntary retention route. The second one is fully accessible route. This is investment done by NRI in government bonds, government securities. Fine. These are the investment done by NRIs in government securities. Will be classified as Indian government bond FPIs. This will be, if done through BRR or FAR, it will be considered as classified as Indian government bond FPIs. This is the correct statement. This is there in the clause of this particular framework. So let's see our next statement. That is, under recent proposal, NRIs and OCIs can control IGB FPIs without any contribution limit. While resident Indians may still face some sort of restriction. This is also there in the clause of this particular framework. Ki there will be NRIs and OCIs can have control over this particular new category, that is Indian government bond under FPIs, that is foreign portfolio investors. Fine. So our statement B is also correct. Statement C, that is under the current norms. It is talking about the current norms. A single NRI, OCI or RI can contribute up to, there is a limitation cap of up to 25% of FPI's total investment. And the combined contribution of these three cannot exceed 50% of the FPI's corpus. Fine. So this is the recent current norms which is going to be revoked if this particular framework will be implemented. Fine. So this statement is also correct. So here our correct answer will be all, that is option number 4. Fine. So let's see some of the important points as far as this particular framework is concerned. So see, first of all, the creation of a new category by SEBI has been introduced, that is Indian government bond FPIs. FPI investing only through voluntary retention route and fully accessible route will classified as Indian government bond FPIs. This was there in our statement 1. So statement 1 was our correct statement. The second one, transition guidelines for existing FPIs. Existing FPIs can opt in as IGB FPI by declaring their intent disinvesting non-eligible holding securities than permitted government bonds. Fine. And there is closing related demat and trading accounts. Closing related demat and trading accounts जिसके थ्रू हम लोग ट्रेड करते हैं. फाइन. These are called demat and trading account. So there is relaxed ownership restriction which were previously in the market, that is current FPI rules. Cap for NRI, OCI and RI investment, that is 25% for individually investing will be there, be not be exceed 25%. Then there is 50% collectively. When investing collectively, it should not exceed 50%. Under the new proposal, NRIs and OCI can control IGFPYs with no cap limitation. This cap limitation will be removed. Fine. And RIs, that is resident Indians, may still face some sort of restriction. That's it for this particular question. Let's move on to our next question, that is question number 4. The question number 4 states, first you guys go through this question, what is about, tell me what is it about. It is about RBI's Digital Lending Direction 2025. Just go through this question once. So have you gone through this question? So fine. The question is the RBI Digital Lending Directions 2025 aim to clean up the digital lending ecosystem by enforcing compliance, mandating public disclosure and regulating third party involvement. The move comes amid concerns over predatory lending, opaque data practices and borrower exploitation. Fine. Borrowers exploitation. Consider the following statements. So our first statement is, all regulated entities. What are regulated entities? That are under the jurisdiction of RBI, that are operating under the jurisdiction of RBI. Fine. Those are called regulated entities. In this context, the regulated entities means all the institutions which are under the jurisdiction of RBI. Fine. So the regulated entities, all regulated entities are required to report only the digital lending apps. That is digital lending apps. The app which offers the digital lending. Digital lending. What is lending means? पैसे देना. फाइन. सो डिजिटली जो ऑनलाइन मीडियम के थ्रू पैसे देते हैं, वैसे ऐप्स को डिजिटल लेंडिंग ऐप्स बोला जा सकता है. फाइन. दैट आर एक्टिव एंड हैव क्रॉस्ड द मिनिमम लेंडिंग थ्रेशोल्ड. फाइन. सो दिस वाज द फर्स्ट स्टेटमेंट. सेकंड स्टेटमेंट इज द पब्लिक डायरेक्टरी ऑफ DLAs, दैट इज digital lending apps hosted by RBI will be updated only once a quarter based on RE submission, that is regulated entity submission. The third one is CIMS portal went live before the public directory of DLAs. These are the three statements. Let's figure out which of these statements are correct. Fine. You have to find the correct one. We have to find the correct one. So our option 1 is regulated. All regulated entities are required to repeat only the digital lending apps. Required only report only the digital lending apps that are active and have crossed minimum lending threshold. There is no any such provision. It means it is all regulated entities are required to report only the digital lending apps. Fine. So this statement is incorrect because it includes all the regulated entities, not only that who are active and have crossed the minimum lending threshold. Fine. So first statement is incorrect. Second one, the public directory of DLAs hosted by RBI will be updated once a quarter based on RE submission. Fine. Based on the RE submission, the public directory of DLAs hosted by RBI will be updated automatically, not quarterly. Fine. So this statement is also incorrect. So here we'll be eliminating all the options which contains 1 and 2. So this also, this also, this also, and E as well. So only option B is left. So let's see what is statement 3, that is CIMS portal. So CIMS portal went live before the public directory of DLAs, that is digital lending apps. So yes, it went live before the public directory of DLAs. It went live on May 2025. But the public directory of DLAs come in around June or July, I think, July 2025. Fine. So option C is the correct answer here. So option B will be the correct answer. That is only third statement is correct. Fine. So let's move on to our next question. That is question number 5. Question number 5. So the question states, in a significant structure reform aimed at enhancing operational efficiency and cost rationalization, the Union Ministry of Finance is gearing up to implement the one state, one regional rural banks RRB policy. The move will see the consolidation of 43 existing RRBs into 28. How many RRBs are currently present in India? That 43. And they will be merged into 28, a transformative step in India's rural banking landscape. Fine. This question is about regional rural banks. So let's see statement one by one. OSOR policy is a reform initiative by Department of Financial Service aimed at consolidating multiple RRBs within a state into a single unified entity. The amalgamation is being carried out under section 23A(1) in the Regional Rural Banks Act of 1976, which allows such mergers in the public interest and for the development of the regions they serve. The third statement is, under this new structure, each state will have a single consolidated RBI unless the state has only one to begin with. Fine. So these are the statements. Let's figure out which of these statements are correct. The first one is, first you have to understand what is RRB. RRB, that is regional rural banks. Fine. So these are the banks who provide financial service to the rural households, areas. Fine. And they were introduced in 1975. And the primary aim of this bank is to provide all the financial service like lending and all the banking services as well to the rural areas. Fine. And the marginalized sections like agriculture and farmers. Fine. So this is the concept of RRB. So recently a new initiative has been launched by India, that is from Department of Financial Service, to merge all the banks, all the regional rural banks of a state into a single one. जितने भी रीजनल रूरल बैंक्स है स्टेट्स में, उन सबको मर्ज करके एक सिंगल एंटिटी बना दिया जाए. फाइन. दिस इज द इनिशिएटिव ऑफ one state, one regional rural bank. So first statement is OSOR policy is a reform initiative by the Department of Financial Services. Yes, as I have told, this is a initiative by Department of Financial Services aimed at consolidating multiple RRBs. There are a lot of RRBs within a state, to merge them within a state into a single unified entity. ठीक है. तो this statement is correct statement. The second one is, the amalgamation is being carried out under section 23A clause 1 of the Regional Rural Banks Act of 1976. This is the RRB Act of 1976. RRB operates under this particular RRB operate under this particular act. Fine, that is RRB Act of 1976, which allows such mergers in the public interest and for the development of the regions they serve. Development of the regions they serve. Fine. So this statement is also correct statement. The third statement, which is option C, under this new structure each state will have a single consolidated RRB. Each state will have a single consolidated RRB unless the state had only one to begin with. Fine. So this statement is also obviously correct. So here the correct answer is option 5, that is all of the statements are correct. Fine. So let's see some of the comparison between regional rural banks and cooperative banks. Fine. So first of all, it is under the jurisdiction of Regional Rural Banks Act of 1976. It comes under Banking Regulation Act of 1949. Fine. Jointly owned by central government, state government and sponsoring bank, among which the share of central bank is 50%, state government is 15% and the rest of 35% is for whom? Sponsoring bank. Fine. But it is owned by government or any private entities. Next one is rural population. It targets whom? It targets rural population and agriculture. Fine. But it targets urban, semi-urban and rural communities. So it comes under the jurisdiction of RBI and supervision and are under the supervision of NABARD. This comes under the jurisdiction of RBI only. Finally, the primary aim of RRB are financial inclusion and rural development, and the aim of cooperative banks are wide range of banking services, to provide wide range of banking services to a larger section of our society. Fine. So that's it for this question. Let's move on to question number 6. Question number 6 is related to natural farming certification system. So the Indian government planning to introduce a new natural farming certification system to boost consumer trust and farmer income. Fine. And farmer income. This initiative will benefit 1.8 million farmers practicing natural farming across 7,80,000 hectares of lands. Fine. So find out here the incorrect statement. We have to figure out the incorrect statement here. So our first statement will go through each statement one by one. The first statement is the certification aims to provide premium pricing for chemical and synthetic fertilizer free products, improving farmer incomes. Next one is the system will be binding in nature for the farmers availing the benefits under PM Kisan, unlike organic farming that uses natural inputs like compost and manure. Natural farming avoids all external inputs, relying completely on natural ecological processes. Option D, that is NFCS will operate under the existing participatory guarantee system PGS India, which is already certified organic products with separate standards for natural farming. What is natural farming? Farming through natural processes, right, without using any type of unnatural pesticides, or by using only natural pesticides, fine, or fertilizers. For examples, cow dungs. Fine. So that is called natural farming. So let's figure out which of the statement is incorrect. So first statement is the certification aims to provide premium pricing for premium pricing for chemical and synthetic free fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers free products. Fine. So this is the primary aim of this particular scheme. Improving the farmer's income, it will obviously improve the farmer income. This statement is absolutely correct, absolutely correct. The second one is the system will be binding in nature for the farmers availing the benefits under PM Kisan. PM Kisan, this is not binding in nature. This is absolutely not binding in nature. This is completely on the will of farmer if he wants to avail in the feature of this particular scheme. Fine. So this statement is incorrect. That's why this is our correct answer. But we'll still go through once other options as well. Unlike organic farming that uses natural inputs like compost and manure, inputs like compost and manure, natural farming avoids all external inputs, completely relying on what? On natural ecological processes. Fine, natural ecological processes. Fine, so this statement is also correct. Obviously this statement is correct because we have to find the incorrect one, but this statement is correct. It completely rely solely on the natural ecological processes. It do not uses any external inputs like compost and manures as organic farming. Fine. The next statement is the NFCs will operate under the existing participatory guarantee system, that is PGS India, which already certifies organic products with separate standards of natural farming. This statement is also correct. Here the correct answer will be option B. This statement is incorrect. Fine. So let's see some of the key components of this particular system, that is natural farming certification system. First of all, these are the features of NFCS, that is it is voluntary in nature, that is participation is voluntary in nature. The system will non-binding as I told you, this was there in our option B. This system is non-binding in nature, meaning farmers can choose whether to participate or not. Fine. So the second one is increased market access. Certified natural farming products will likely to be able to command higher prices similar to organic farming, distinct from how it is different from organic farming. Unlike organic farming that uses natural inputs like compost and manure, natural farming avoids all external inputs, relying completely on the natural processes. Fine. The next thing is certification agency. State and union territory boards responsible for organic farming may also oversee natural farming certification. There is not any clarity yet. Fine. Next is the NFCS will operate under the existing participatory guarantee system, that is PGS India, which already certifies organic products with separate standard of natural farming. This was the fourth statement. This was our fourth statement. Fine. Consumer confidence, it will also enhance consumer confidence in quality and safety of natural farming products. Fine. So that's it for natural farming certification system. Let's move on to our next question. Our question number 7. So the question states, which of this is known as green gold of Odisha? Which of these are known as green gold of Odisha? You guys tell me. Which of these is known as green gold of Odisha? Our options are Koraput Kala Jeera rice, Kendu leaves, Nayagarh Kantemundi brinjal, Dhenkanal magji or Odisha ikat. So among these 5, which is the correct answer, which is known as the green gold of Odisha? Which is known as the green gold of Odisha. So the correct answer here will be what? Correct answer here will be option B, that is Kendu leaves. It is known as green gold of Odisha, but these 4 are also from Odisha. Fine. These four are also from Odisha. And these four also have got the GI tags. They are GI tagged substances. Fine. And these all five belongs to Odisha. You must remember these four also. These are very important. Fine. That's it for this question. Nothing else to discuss in this particular question. So let's move on to our next question. That is question number 8. Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI, has issued a public warning to investors about Strata, a commercial real estate investment platform, after it voluntarily surrendered its small and medium real estate investment trust, that is SM REIT license. Consider the following statement with respect to SM REITs. Fine. So as you all know, recently SEBI has introduced this new SM REIT, that is small and medium real estate investment trust. Regarding that, let's see which of these statements are correct. First one is a small and medium REIT. SM REIT is a type of real estate investment trust designed to accommodate smaller real estate projects. Fine. The second one is it lowers the entry threshold from 500 crore for regular REITs to 100 crore, thereby democratizing real estate investments. The third one is each SM REIT scheme will operate through dedicated special purpose vehicle for asset ownership. Fine. So you guys tell me what is the correct answer here. So let's figure out one by one. Let's go through this statement one by one. First statement is SM REIT. First of all, you need to understand what is the concept of REIT and InvITs. I have told you in earlier classes also. See, what is REIT? REIT is Real Estate Investment Trust. Fine. See, as far as any development of any country is concerned, जब भी कोई भी कंट्री की डेवलपमेंट की बात होती है तो कंट्री के डेवलपमेंट के मतलब कंट्री के सामने जो सबसे बड़ा इशू आता है वो आता है फंडिंग की, फाइनेंस की. फाइन. फाइनेंस इज द major issue when it comes to developing of any particular sector. Fine. So for that reason a trust has been formed, that is Real Estate Investment Trust. And वो क्या करेंगे, वो इशू करेंगे MFUs, that is Mutual Fund Units. Fine. चूँकि वो ट्रस्ट है, that's why they'll issue MFUs, that is units. अगर वो कंपनीज होती तो they'll be issuing bonds. Fine, bonds. So trust has, for that reason they'll issue units, that is MFU, म्यूचुअल फंड यूनिट्स. कहाँ इशू करेंगी? फाइनेंशियल मार्केट में, इंडियाज फाइनेंशियल मार्केट में. फाइन. फाइनेंशियल मार्केट में क्यों इशू करेंगी? चूंकि इन्वेस्टर्स उन यूनिट्स को खरीदे और बदले में उन्हें पैसा दे, फंडिंग दे, फाइनेंस दे. फाइन. एंड इनसे इन्वेस्टर्स को इनसे क्या मिलेगा? दे विल गॉट देयर रिटर्न. फाइन. और वो पैसा विल बी यूज फॉर द रियल एस्टेट प्रोजेक्ट, डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट. दोज मनी विल बी यूज फॉर रियल एस्टेट डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स. इससे इन ट्रस्ट को क्या मिली? इंटरेस्ट को मिला फंडिंग, फाइनेंस, कैपिटल. फाइन. कैपिटल. और इन्हें क्या मिले? हमारे इन्वेस्टर्स को क्या मिला? उन्हें उनका रिटर्न मिला. फाइन. सो दिस इज द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ रियल एस्टेट इन्वेस्टमेंट ट्रस्ट, दैट इज REITs. सो सेम विद द InvITs as well. Same as the InvITs, that is Infrastructure Investment Trust. Fine. Infrastructure Investment ट्रस्ट, वो भी क्या इशू करेंगी, एमएफयूज इश्यूज करेंगी, एंड दे विल बोरो मनी फ्रॉम द मार्केट एंड दोज मनी विल डायरेक्टली बी यूज्ड फॉर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स। इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स में उन पैसों का यूज किया जाएगा, एंड फाइनली दे विल गॉट देयर रिटर्न्स एंड द ट्रस्ट विल गॉट फाइनेंस कैपिटल मनी। फाइन, उन पैसों को कहाँ यूज किया जाएगा, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स में। इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स लाइक रोड्स, बिल्डिंग्स और टोल प्लाजाज। फाइन, सो रिसेंटली सेबी ने नया एक कैटेगरी अनाउंस किया, दैट इज स्मॉल एंड मीडियम REITs। फाइन, so let's see which of these statement is correct regarding SM REITs. So small and medium REIT is a type of real estate investment trust designed to accommodate smaller real estate projects. Absolutely correct, because it is introduced to accommodate smaller real estate projects which are not included in REITs. The second one is it lowers the entry threshold from 500 crore asset size for regular REITs to 100 crore, thereby democratizing real estate investment. This statement is what? Correct or not? This statement is absolutely incorrect, because the asset value size had been fixed by 50 crore, 50 CR, not 100 crore, and 500 crore for regular REITs. Fine, so this statement is incorrect. So let's see. Each SM REIT scheme will operate through a dedicated special purpose vehicle. What are they? They are basically special purpose vehicle which takes assets, mortgages, and in return they issues securities which are purchased by investors. Fine, which are purchased by investors, and the money which SPV got in terms of payment, which includes interest, interest, and all the money which directly gone to whom? Directly gone to investors. This was a concept we discussed on securitization as well. This concept was also discussed in the securitization topic as well. So here the question states ki each SM REITs scheme will operate through dedicated special purpose vehicle for asset ownership. That is also correct. Fine. So here A and C is the correct answer. Let's see which of these statement is correct. A and C. Yeah, fine. A and C. That is option number 4. A and C is the correct option over here. So let's see some of the key features of SM REIT, that is small and medium real estate investment trust. So first of all, it is a type of real estate investment trust designed to accommodate smaller real estate project. This was our statement, statement number 1. Fine, statement number 1. So this is the key feature of SM REITs. Minimum asset value, as I have told you, must have a minimum real estate asset value of 50 crore, not 100 crore. Fine. Fund pooling mechanism can raise a minimum 50 crore through at least 200 investors by issuing investment unit. By issuing investment units, as I told, that is MFUs. Fund utilization fund are used to acquire and manage real estate asset and generate income for investors. Ownership via SPVs, that is special purpose vehicles. Each SM REIT scheme will operate through dedicated special purpose vehicle for asset. Fine. So this was our third statement. Investment management requirement must have a net worth of at least 20 crore. Required to maintain a dedicated website disclosing all SM REIT scheme. Must appoint a separate trustee to ensure oversight. Disclosing threshold all SM REIT scheme for transparency. Fine. So that's it for the feature of SM REIT, that is small and medium real estate investment trust. Let's move on to our next question, that is question number 9. And the question number 9 is about NBFC originate loans and then sell up to 80% of the loan to whom? To partner banks via direct assignment. This model provides NBFCs operational flexibility and benefits from a waiver on minimum holding period for the loan sold to banks. Fine. And as per ICRA April 2025, co-lending asset under management, that is AUM, reached to 80,000 crore by March 2024, showing the strong growth. AUM क्या होती है? एसेट अंडर मैनेजमेंट. सपोज एक कंपनी है, फाइन, एक कंपनी है, कंपनी ए इज देयर, फाइन. उनके क्लाइंट्स के द्वारा काफ़ी सारे उसमें फंड्स जमा किए गए in the form of money or securities. Fine. This includes all the assets including money, security, or fine. So this will known as asset under management. Fine. It refers to the total value of asset managed by a firm. तो जितने भी एसेट जमा किए गए यहाँ पे उनके क्लाइंट्स के द्वारा ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ देयर क्लाइंट्स, उसे हम लोग बोलेंगे एसेट अंडर मैनेजमेंट. और जिस कंपनी का AUM अगर सबसे ज़्यादा होगा दे कैन बी कॉल्ड एज कि वो बहुत ज़्यादा ट्रस्टेड कंपनी है या तो बहुत ज़्यादा पुरानी कंपनी है. एंड वाइस वर्सा, अगर किसी का AUM बहुत कम होता है तो वी कैन से कि वो कंपनी या तो बहुत नई है, आइदर वो कंपनी ट्रस्टेड बिल्कुल भी नहीं है. फाइन. So let's see some of the statement. The first one is shift from the current model to a joint lending model where the banks and NBFC would simultaneously underwrite and disburse loans दे सकते. Fine. Second one is this new approach requires the both lenders to share the loan underwriting process and dispersal, changing the operational dynamics. The third one is asset under management refers to the total market value of financial assets managed by an individual, firm or institution on behalf of client. Fine. So among these statements, which of them are correct or incorrect? Let's find out. So the first statement states कि it shifts from the current model to a joint lending model where a bank and NBFC combinedly would simultaneously underwrite and disperse loan. Yes, this is the correct answer. This is the correct option here. Let's see option B. What is it? This new approach requires both lenders to share the loan underwriting processes and dispersal, changing the operational dynamics. Yes, this is also correct. Fine. Finally, the third statement which is there, asset under management, as I told, it refers to the total market value of financial assets managed by an individual or firm or institution on behalf of whom? On behalf of their clients. So this statement is also correct. This is the definition of AUM. Fine. For that reason all the three statements are correct, but here we have to find the incorrect one, and none of the above statements are incorrect. It means all of the statements are correct. Fine. We have to find the incorrect one. We have chosen option number 5. So let's move on to our next question, and the question number 10, which is our today's last question. The President of India has invoked Article 143 of Clause 1 to seek the Supreme Court's opinion on whether time limits can be imposed on the president and governors for deciding on state legislature bills. Fine. So see, recently president, this is a very important news, because recently President of India has invoked Article 143 Clause 1 that is related to advisory jurisdiction. फाइन, इसके तहत सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ओपिनियन मांगा है किससे? एससी से, दैट इज सुप्रीम कोर्ट ऑफ इंडिया, टू इम्पोज कि वेदर मतलब क्या टाइम लिमिट लगाया जा सकता है कि इनमें जो भी कंसेंट के लिए बिल पहुंचते गवर्नर्स के पास और फिर बाद में कुछ बिल्स पहुंचते प्रेसिडेंट्स के पास, उनमें फाइन क्या ये रेस्ट्रिक्शन दैट इज टाइम लिमिट लगाया जा सकता है या नहीं? ये एक एडवाइजरी जुरिडिक्शन के तहत अंडर आर्टिकल 143(1) क्लाउज 1 के अंडर प्रेसिडेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने सुप्रीम कोर्ट से एडवाइस मांगा है. फाइन. सो यहाँ पे दो चीज़ जानना बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है फ्रॉम द एग्जाम पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. ठीक है, जब भी कोई भी बिल रिजर्व किया जाता है गवर्नर के पास, स्टेट लेजिस्लेचर से जो भी बिल आते हैं, फाइन, तो वो रिजर्व की जाती है कुछ बिल्स अंडर आर्टिकल 200 गवर्नर एसेंट के लिए बिल्स रिजर्व की जाती है. वो आर्टिकल बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, दैट इज आर्टिकल 200. और उन्हीं बिल में से कुछ प्रेसिडेंट के कंसेंट के लिए भी रखा जाता है गवर्नर्स के द्वारा, एंड दैट इज अंडर आर्टिकल 201. तो these two articles are very important, please keep it in mind. So आगे पढ़ते, this seeks to address delays in gubernatorial assent, especially in politically sensitive states. Consider the following statement with respect to advisory jurisdiction. So first statement is, it empowers the President of India to seek the Supreme Court's opinion on important legal or factual questions of public significance. This process prevents constitutional ambiguities and facilitates non-litigious resolution of any issue. Fine. So our first statement was कि it empowers the President of India. This particular advisory jurisdiction that is under Article 143 Clause A, 143 Clause 1 states empowers President of India to seek the Supreme Court's opinion. किनका ओपिनियन लेने के लिए? सुप्रीम कोर्ट्स का. On an important legal or factual questions of public significance. Important legal or factual questions public significance. But जो भी opinion मांगा जाएगा सुप्रीम कोर्ट से, फाइन, that is not binding in nature. मतलब सुप्रीम कोर्ट वो एडवाइस प्रेसिडेंट को दे भी सकता है और नहीं भी दे सकता. फाइन, दैट इज कंप्लीटली ऑन द विल ऑफ सुप्रीम कोर्ट. दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. फाइन. सो आवर फर्स्ट स्टेटमेंट इज ऑब्वियसली करेक्ट. दिस इज द डेफिनेशन ऑफ आर्टिकल 143 क्लॉज ए. दिस प्रोसेस प्रिवेंट्स कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल एम्बिग्विटीज एंड फैसिलिटेट्स नॉन लिटिजियस रिजोल्यूशन ऑफ एनी इशू. दिस इज ऑल्सो द करेक्ट. दैट मीन्स बोथ ऑफ द स्टेटमेंट आर correct. Option 3, that is both of the statement are correct, is the right answer. But let's see some of the important things about this advisory jurisdiction which becomes very important for the examinations. Fine. So first of all, here is about advisory jurisdiction. See, it empowers the President of India to seek the Supreme Court's opinion on important legal or factual questions of public significance. This was our statement 1, first statement. So it empowers President of India to seek the Supreme Court's opinion on important legal or factual questions, fine, of public significance. The second one is this process prevents constitutional ambiguities, facilitates non-litigious resolution of any issue. This was our statement. Second key characteristic: the opinion render it advisory and not binding. This is what I was telling you कि this opinion is advisory. Fine, the opinion which Supreme Court have gave could be मतलब वो प्रेसिडेंट के द्वारा एक्सेप्ट या तो कर ली जाएगी, वो एक्सेप्ट या तो एडवाइस मान लिया जाएगा या तो नहीं माना जाएगा. दैट इज कंप्लीटली ऑन द विल ऑफ हूम, विल ऑफ द प्रेसिडेंट. फाइन. Constitutional provision 143(1) President may refer question of law or fact of public importance to Supreme Court. Deals with this is the feature discretionary of Supreme Court. SC may accept or decline the reference. This is the feature which I was telling you कि SC Supreme Court may accept or decline the reference. Advisory in nature, not legally enforceable, unlike a court judgment. Heard by constitutional bench as per article 145 clause 3. This is also a very important article. A minimum of 5 judge bench hears such reference. Minimum of 5 bench. Independent legal insight offer the president an alternative to cabinet advice, ensuring the objective constitutional interpretation. Fine. So this whole advisory jurisdiction topic becomes very important. Fine. So that's it for today's session. Hope you guys like the video. If you like the video, please do subscribe our channel, follow us on Telegram as well for daily updates. Thank you so much.